The hospital was a tomb of whispers, its sterile halls echoing with the ghosts of 1,000 hurried footsteps. Eleanor Grayson, 72 and weathered like an oak in winter, stood at the edge of Ward 4B, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of her old nurse's cap. She'd retired a decade ago, but tonight, something had pulled her back, a faint, unshakable tug at her heart, like a patient's hand reaching out in the dark. 10 years had passed since she last walked these corridors, yet the scent of antiseptic and the hum of distant monitors felt as familiar as her own heartbeat. Eleanor wasn't supposed to be here. The security guard, half asleep at the front desk, hadn't noticed her slip through the side entrance, her steps silent but purposeful. She moved with the grace of someone who'd spent 40 years navigating these wards, tending to the sick, the dying, and the forgotten. But tonight, her mission was different. In her trembling hands, she clutched a small, worn teddy bear, its brown fur matted from years of love. It wasn't hers. It had belonged to someone else, someone who'd been her anchor through decades of loss. Ward 4B was the quietest part of St. Agnes Hospital, reserved for children too sick to leave their beds. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Eleanor paused at the door of room 412, her breath catching as she glimpsed the tiny figure inside. A girl, no older than 7, lay curled beneath a thin blanket, her bald head gleaming under the faint glow of a heart monitor. Her name was Lily, or so the chart at the foot of her bed read. Acute leukemia. Terminal. The words stung Eleanor's eyes, though she'd seen them countless times before. Lily's mother, a pale woman with hollow cheeks, slept in a chair beside her, one hand resting on the bed. Eleanor didn't wake her. Instead, she slipped inside, her movements as soft as a prayer. She knelt by Lily's side, studying the girl's fragile face, her closed eyes, her shallow breaths, the way her small hands clutched at nothing. Eleanor knew that look. It was the look of a child who'd forgotten what hope felt like. "Little one," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've brought you something." She placed the teddy bear in the crook of Lily's arm, tucking it close to her chest. The girl stirred, her eyelids fluttering but not opening. Eleanor's heart clenched. She hadn't come here on a whim. The bear, named Buttons by its original owner, had once belonged to her best friend, Margaret, another nurse who'd worked beside her in these very halls. Margaret had been the light to Eleanor's shadow, her laughter a balm for the endless grief of their work. But Margaret was gone now, taken by cancer 5 years ago, and Buttons had sat on Eleanor's shelf ever since, a silent reminder of a promise they'd made. They'd sworn to each other, late one night over coffee in the break room, that they'd always find a way to bring comfort to those who needed it most. Margaret had been the one to start it, giving Buttons to a dying boy in Ward 4B decades ago, whispering to him that the bear would keep him safe. When the boy passed, the bear somehow found its way back to Margaret, as if it knew its work wasn't done. Over the years, Buttons had been passed to countless children, a quiet guardian in their darkest hours. And now, it was Lily's turn. Eleanor brushed a tear from her cheek, her fingers lingering on the bear's worn fur. "You take care of her, Buttons," she murmured, "like you did for all the others." As she stood to leave, a soft voice stopped her. "Who are you?" Eleanor froze, turning to see Lily's mother staring at her, eyes wide with exhaustion and suspicion. The woman's hands gripped the arms of her chair, as if ready to leap up and protect her daughter. "I'm no one," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Just someone who wanted to leave a gift." The mother's gaze fell to the teddy bear, then back to Eleanor. Her expression softened, but only slightly. "Why?" Eleanor hesitated. How could she explain the weight of 40 years, the lives saved and lost, the promise that had brought her here tonight? "Because sometimes," she said finally, "a little comfort can make all the difference." The mother didn't respond, but her eyes glistened. Eleanor slipped out before more questions could be asked, her heart pounding as she hurried down the hall. She didn't see the small figure watching her from the doorway of room 412. Lily, awake now, clutching Buttons tightly, a faint smile breaking through her pain. The next night, Eleanor returned. She couldn't stay away. The hospital had become a part of her, woven into her bones like the roots of an ancient tree. She told herself it was to check on Lily, to see if Buttons had brought the girl any peace. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She was searching for something: redemption, perhaps, or a way to honor Margaret's memory. Ward 4B was quieter than the night before, the air thick with the stillness of late hours. Eleanor moved silently, her eyes scanning the charts outside each room. She stopped at room 412, her breath catching as she saw Lily sitting up in bed, the teddy bear propped beside her. The girl was drawing, her small hands moving slowly across a sketchpad. Eleanor's chest tightened. She hadn't expected to see Lily awake, let alone so alive. "You're back," a voice said, startling her. It was the mother, standing in the hallway, a cup of coffee in her hands. Her name, Eleanor learned, was Sarah. "I didn't mean to intrude," Eleanor said quickly. I wanted to see how she's doing." Sarah's gaze softened, but there was a sharpness to it, a mother's instinct to protect. "She hasn't let go of that bear since you left it. She says it talks to her." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "Talks to her?" Sarah nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "She says it tells her stories about other kids, ones who aren't scared anymore. I don't know where she gets it from, but it's the first time I've seen her smile in weeks." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her, mingled with an ache she couldn't name. "I'm glad," she whispered. Sarah hesitated, then stepped closer. "You're not just a stranger, are you? You've been here before." Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted to tell Sarah everything about Margaret, about Buttons, about the decades spent fighting for every heartbeat in these halls. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said, "I used to work here. A long time ago." Sarah studied her, then nodded, as if accepting the half-truth. "Thank you," she said simply, before turning back to her daughter's room. Eleanor lingered in the hallway, her eyes fixed on Lily through the window. The girl looked up, meeting her gaze, and for a moment, Eleanor felt as if Margaret were standing beside her, her laughter echoing through the years. She didn't know it then, but Lily's small act of holding Buttons would set something larger in motion, a chain of events that would unravel secrets Eleanor had buried long ago. Eleanor's visits became a ritual, a silent pilgrimage under the cover of night. Each evening, she slipped into St. Agnes Hospital, her heart a tangled knot of hope and guilt. She told herself she was there for Lily, to ensure the girl found solace in Buttons, but the truth was heavier. Eleanor was chasing the ghost of Margaret, seeking absolution in the quiet ward where they'd once been unstoppable. Lily's condition hadn't improved, but her spirit had. The girl's laughter, faint but real, drifted through the door of room 412, a sound that pierced Eleanor's heart like sunlight through storm clouds. She'd stand in the shadows, watching as Lily whispered to Buttons, her small hands tracing the bear's worn stitches as if they held the secrets of the universe. Sarah, too, had begun to soften, offering Eleanor a tired smile or a nod when their paths crossed. It was a fragile trust, one Eleanor cherished but didn't dare lean into. On the fifth night, everything changed. Eleanor was lingering near room 412 when a new figure appeared in the hallway, a man in his late 40s, his face gaunt and his eyes haunted. He wore a janitor's uniform, but his movements were too deliberate, too purposeful for someone merely cleaning floors. He carried a small notebook, scribbling furiously as he glanced at the charts outside each room. Eleanor's instincts, honed by decades in the hospital, prickled. She stepped into the shadows, watching as he paused outside Lily's door, his pen hovering over the page. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low but firm. The man startled, nearly dropping his notebook. "To him, just maintenance," he stammered, but his eyes betrayed him, darting toward Lily's room with something like desperation. Eleanor stepped closer, her gaze steady. "You're not maintenance. I've worked here long enough to know the difference." He hesitated, then sighed, his shoulders slumping. "My name's Daniel," he said quietly. I'm looking for someone." Eleanor's heart thudded. "Who?" Daniel's eyes flicked to Lily's door, then back to her. "My daughter. She was here, years ago. Ward 4B. She didn't make it." The words hit Eleanor like a blow. She knew the weight of loss, had carried it for decades, but Daniel's grief was raw, a wound that hadn't healed. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice softening. "But why are you here now?" He clutched the notebook tighter, his knuckles white. "I heard about a nurse. Someone who used to work here, who gave kids things. Gifts, to make them feel safe. My daughter had a bear, like the one that girl in there has." He nodded toward Lily's room. "I need to know who that nurse was. I need to know why she did it." Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't expected These a stranger from the past, chasing the same thread she'd been weaving with Buttons. "What was your daughter's name?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Clara," he said, his voice breaking. "Clara Monroe." The name struck a chord, distant but sharp. Eleanor remembered a girl named Clara, a bright-eyed child with a laugh like wind chimes, who'd held Buttons in her final days. Margaret had been the one to give her the bear, whispering stories to ease her fear. Eleanor had been there, too, holding Clara's hand when the end came. The memory burned, threatening to unravel her. "I knew Clara," Eleanor admitted, her voice trembling. "I was one of the nurses here." Daniel's eyes widened, a mix of hope and anguish flooding his face. "Then you know who gave her the bear? Please, tell me. I've been searching for years." Eleanor wanted to confess everything about Margaret, about the promise, about Button's quiet mission. But something held her back. Daniel's intensity, his need for answers, felt like a mirror to her own unresolved grief. Instead, she said, "Give me time. I'll find out what I can." Daniel nodded, though his eyes lingered on her, searching for truth. He slipped away into the dark, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts. She leaned against the wall, her heart racing. Clara, Buttons, Margaret. The past was clawing its way back, and Eleanor wasn't sure she was ready to face it. The next night, Eleanor arrived earlier, her mind churning with Daniel's words. She'd spent the day digging through old boxes in her attic, searching for anything that might connect her to Clara. She found a photograph of her and Margaret, smiling in their crisp white uniforms, Buttons tucked under Margaret's arm. On the back, in Margaret's looping handwriting, was a list of names. Clara's was among them, alongside dozens of others' children they'd cared for, children who'd held Buttons in their final moments. Eleanor brought the photograph to the hospital, clutching it like a talisman. She didn't know what she'd say to Daniel, but she felt compelled to share something, to ease his pain. When she reached Ward 4B, she found Lily awake, her sketchpad filled with drawings of Buttons in fantastical Placiza Castle, a forest, a ship sailing among the stars. The girl's eyes lit up when she saw Eleanor. "You're the lady who gave me Buttons," Lily said, her voice weak but bright. "He's my best friend now." Eleanor's heart swelled. "I'm glad he's taking care of you," she said, sitting beside the bed. "What stories has he told you?" Lily's smile widened. "He says he's been to lots of places, with lots of kids like me. He says they're all okay now, and they're watching over me." Eleanor's throat tightened. She didn't know if it was Lily's imagination or something more, but the words felt like Margaret's voice, reaching across the years. She stayed with Lily longer than she meant to, listening as the girl spun tales of Button's adventures. For a moment, the weight of the past lifted, replaced by the simple joy of a child's belief. But when Eleanor stepped back into the hallway, Daniel was there, waiting. His notebook was open, his eyes locked on her. "You found something," he said, not a question. Eleanor hesitated, then handed him the photograph. "This was taken years ago," she said. "The woman with me, she's the one who gave Clara the bear." Daniel stared at the image, his fingers trembling. "Who is she? Where is she now?" Eleanor swallowed hard. "Her name was Margaret. She's gone. Cancer, 5 years ago." Daniel's face crumpled, but he nodded, as if he'd expected the answer. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for telling me." As he walked away, Eleanor felt a shift inside her, a crack in the walls she'd built around her grief. She didn't know it yet, but Daniel's search was far from over, and his presence would force her to confront a truth she'd buried long ago. Eleanor's nights at St. Agnes became a tightrope walk between memory and purpose. Each visit to Lily brought her closer to the girl, whose frail body seemed to house a spirit too big for the hospital's sterile walls. But Daniel's presence lingered like a storm cloud, his questions about Clara and Margaret stirring up ghosts Eleanor had fought to keep buried. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled towards something inevitable, a reckoning she wasn't ready to face. Lily had begun to expect her, her eyes lighting up whenever Eleanor appeared at the door. The teddy bear, Buttons, was never far from her side, its worn fur a constant in the chaos of her illness. One night, Lily showed Eleanor a new drawing-a picture of Buttons standing on a hill, surrounded by glowing figures. "These are the kids he knew before," Lily said, her voice soft but certain. "They're his friends, and now they're mine, too." Eleanor's heart ached at the words. She wanted to believe it was just a child's imagination, but Lily's drawings felt like echoes of the past, as if Buttons carried the memories of every child it had comforted. She sat with Lily, listening to her stories, each one a thread tying her to Margaret's legacy. But the joy of those moments was tempered by the weight of Daniel's search. He hadn't returned since their last encounter, but Eleanor knew he wasn't finished. His notebook, his haunted eyes, they told her he was chasing more than just answers. On the 10th night, the hospital felt different. The air was heavier, the silence deeper, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Eleanor was halfway to Ward 4B when she heard footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate, not the hurried shuffle of a nurse or the plodding gait of a janitor. She turned to find a woman standing in the hallway, her face half hidden in shadow. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a posture that spoke of authority. She wore a visitor's badge, but something about her felt out of place, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong slot. "You're Eleanor Grayson," the woman said, her voice low and measured. "I've been looking for you." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Do I know you?" The woman stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "My name is Helen Carter. I was a doctor here, years ago. I worked with you and Margaret in Ward 4B. The name hit Eleanor like a wave, dragging her back to memories she'd locked away. Helen had been a force in the hospital, brilliant, uncompromising, and fiercely protective of her patients. But she'd left abruptly, decades ago, after a falling out with the administration. Eleanor hadn't seen her since. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight. Helen's gaze was unflinching. "I heard about the bear. The one you've been giving to kids in this ward. It's Margaret's, isn't it?" Eleanor's hands trembled. She wanted to deny it, to protect the fragile mission she and Margaret had built. But Helen's eyes held a knowing that made lies impossible. "How did you know?" "Because I was there when it started," Helen said. "Margaret gave that bear to a boy named Tommy back in '78. I saw what it did for him, gave him peace in his final days. And I know it didn't stop there." Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't expected anyone else to remember Button's journey, let alone a doctor who'd vanished from her life decades ago. "Why does it matter to you now?" Helen's expression softened, but only slightly. "Because I owe Margaret. She stood up for me when no one else did, when the hospital tried to bury a mistake I made. I left, but I never forgot what she did. And now I hear you're continuing her work, passing that bear to kids like Lily." Eleanor's mind raced. Helen's sudden appearance felt like a twist of fate, a reminder that Margaret's legacy reached further than she'd realized. But there was something else in Helen's tone, a hint of urgency that set Eleanor on edge. "There's a man looking for you," Helen said, her voice dropping. "Daniel Monroe. He's been asking questions about the bear, about Margaret. He thinks there's more to it, something the hospital covered up." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "Covered up?" Helen nodded. "He's been digging into old records, trying to find out what happened to his daughter, Clara. He thinks the bear is connected to something bigger, a pattern of kids who got sicker after they got it." The accusation hit Eleanor like a slap. She'd spent years ensuring Buttons was a source of comfort, not harm. The idea that it could be linked to something sinister was unthinkable. "That's impossible," she said, her voice shaking. "The bear is it's just a gift. A way to help them feel safe." Helen's eyes softened, but her words were firm. "I believe you. But Daniel doesn't. And he's not the only one asking questions. You need to be careful, Eleanor. This ward has secrets, and you're stirring them up." Eleanor stood frozen as Helen walked away, her words echoing in the empty hallway. She thought of Clara, of Margaret, of the countless children who'd held Buttons in their final moments. Could there be truth to Daniel's suspicions? The thought made her stomach churn, but she pushed it aside. She had to focus on Lily, on keeping Margaret's promise alive. When she reached room 412, Lily was asleep, Buttons tucked under her arm. Sarah was there, her eyes red from crying. "She had a rough day," Sarah whispered. But she kept talking about Buttons, how he makes her feel strong. Eleanor nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She stayed with Lily until dawn, her mind a storm of questions. Helen's warning, Daniel's search, the photograph in her pocket, they were pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve. But as she looked at Lily, she knew she couldn't stop. Not yet. Eleanor's world had begun to unravel, each night at St. Agnes pulling her deeper into a past she'd tried to leave behind. Helen's warning echoed in her mind. a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the hospital's quiet hum. She wanted to believe Buttons was a beacon of hope, a symbol of Margaret's kindness, but Daniel's suspicions and Helen's cryptic words planted seeds of doubt that grew with every step she took. Lily, though, remained her anchor. The girl's condition was worsening, her breath shallower, her skin paler, but her spirit burned bright. She'd begun writing stories about Buttons, filling her sketchpad with tales of his adventures with other children. Each night, Eleanor read them aloud, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. Lily's words were a lifeline, a reminder of why she kept coming back. But the weight of Daniel's search and Helen's revelations made each visit feel like a step toward a precipice. On the 12th night, Eleanor arrived to find Ward 4B in chaos. Nurses rushed past, their faces tight with urgency. A code blue had been called in room 410, 2 doors down from Lily. Eleanor's instincts kicked in, her body moving before her mind could catch up. She slipped into the room, where a boy no older than 10 lay motionless, a team of doctors and nurses fighting to bring him back. Eleanor stood in the corner, her hands clasped tightly, whispering a prayer she hadn't spoken in years. When the chaos subsided, the boy was stabilized, but the air was thick with tension. Eleanor returned to Lily's room, her heart heavy. Sarah was there, her face etched with worry. "She had a seizure today," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "They don't think she has much time." Eleanor's knees buckled, but she caught herself on the edge of the bed. Lily was awake, her eyes bright despite the exhaustion etched into her face. "Don't be sad," Lily whispered, clutching Buttons. "He says it's okay. He says I'll see his other friends soon." Eleanor wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. Instead, she took Lily's hand, her fingers trembling. "You're so brave, little one," she said. "Braver than I've ever been." Lily smiled, a small, radiant thing that broke Eleanor's heart. "Will you tell Buttons' story when I'm gone?" she asked. "So other kids know he's their friend, too?" Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise." As she left the room, she found Daniel waiting in the hallway, his notebook clutched to his chest. His eyes were red, his face a mask of grief and determination. "I found something," he said, his voice low. "Records from when Clara was here. There was a drug trial, something experimental. Margaret was involved." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the hospital wasn't honest about what happened to Clara," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "Or the other kids. The bear, it was a marker. Every kid who got it was part of the trial." Eleanor's mind reeled. She remembered the trial, vague details of a new treatment, hushed conversations between doctors, Margaret's late-night worries. But she'd never connected it to Buttons. "You're wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "Margaret would never hurt anyone." "I don't think she knew," Daniel said. "But someone did. And you need to help me find out who." Before Eleanor could respond, Helen appeared, her face grim. "He's right," she said. "I was part of it, too. I didn't know the full scope until I started digging. The trial was shut down, but the records were buried. Margaret suspected something, but she died before she could prove it." Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her. The hospital, her sanctuary, her home, was tainted by secrets she'd never seen. She thought of Margaret's laughter, her fierce compassion, and the bear that had carried her love to so many children. Had it all been a lie? "I need time," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible. She stumbled out of the hospital, the photograph of her and Margaret burning a hole in her pocket. She didn't know what to believe anymore, but she knew she couldn't stop. Not for Margaret, not for Lily, not for the children who'd come before. The next night, she returned, driven by a resolve she hadn't felt in years. Lily was weaker, her breaths barely audible, but she still clutched Buttons, her stories unfinished. Eleanor sat beside her, reading the latest Talia story of Buttons leading a parade of stars. As she read, she made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth, no matter what it cost her. Outside, Daniel and Helen were waiting, their faces set with purpose. Together, they would dig into the hospital's past, chasing answers that might break them. But for now, Eleanor stayed with Lily, her voice steady as she read, her heart tethered to a little girl and a bear that carried the weight of too many promises.